All right, hello everybody. Welcome to today's Optima online webinar. My name is Andrew, one of the instructional designers here at NASM, and we are coming to you live from our houses today. So this is the quarantine edition of Optima Online. We are out of our studio. Everyone's working from home, social distancing, keeping everyone safe. So I want to thank you all for joining us here today. So today's episode is going to be episode 2 of our CES Continuum series. So this is going to be talking about the second part of the CES Continuum, which is lengthen. So on our last one, we discussed inhibit. So that's using those foam rollers, self-massage to kind of calm those tissues down. And today we're going to be talking with some serious industry experts about the lengthening phase and just all the science of stretching and flexibility. So moving in here, so kind of the topics that we're going to be covering today is the science of flexibility. We're going to be talking about the synergy between NASM and the Stretch to Win program, who our guests today are the founders of. And then we'll be talking about some various ways that you can actually use flexibility with your clients every single day. So a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into things here. We do have a promotion running here today only. As we do with all these webinars, we're going to be offering you 35% off of the new CES. You're going to have to call in, discuss that with one of our program advisors, and mention the code webinar19. So again, that's phone orders only. You can call 888-773-1827 and mention webinar19 when you do so to get that 35% off. Also at the end of this, we've got some special giveaways and promotion codes from our guests, as well as a special one here from NASM. Stay tuned all the way to the end of the webinar so that you guys can get those. Something to keep in mind as well, as with everybody working from home these days, we are on limited bandwidth, so please excuse us if there are any dips in the quality of the video stream. We do apologize in advance for that, but we're trying to get these content out to you no matter where we're coming from, even though we don't have our studio available to us. As well too, at the end of the webinar today, I will be kind of monitoring your questions throughout here. Want to keep in mind, keep these to content questions for our guests. If you have questions about any of our programs, any of the NASM products, AFA products that are available out there, go ahead and give one of our program advisors a call at that number below again. So that's 888-773-1827. They will be able to answer all your product questions and let you know everything we have going on today, get you into the right thing for you and your education. So today's guests are going to be Chris and Ann Fredrick. Chris was one of the CES contributing authors. I actually worked with him personally in designing the human movement science chapter of the new CES that just came out. And it was a joy working with him. We really kind of reworked how we taught all those basic human science things, and we're able to bring in this concept called regional interdependence into the mix to kind of bring much more of a head-to-toe understanding of what the CES process actually does, where you can fix something at your ankle and it'll affect something at your hip. But they're going to get much more into detail about that here today. Chris and Ann are the co-authors of 2 highly popular books out there on stretching, Fascial Stretch Therapy and Stretch to Win. They're the founders of those programs, and they'll be joining us here live to kind of talk with our NASM master instructor and resident expert interviewer, Prentice Rhodes. He's a clinician, personal trainer, studio owner, and one of our product managers here at NASM. So without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to you, Prentice, let you take things away. I will be listening here in the background, but you'll see my face disappear until I come back here at the end for the live Q&A. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Andrew. That was a very generous introduction. As Andrew said, my name is Prentice Rhodes, and I'm a product manager for NASM, but previously I worked as a master instructor. And in a galaxy far, far away a long time ago, I was a clinician working in a chiropractic and rehabilitation practice. But this isn't about me. I am happy to introduce to you Chris and Ann Fredrick, the founders of Stretch to Win, Fascial Stretch Therapy, Very happy to have them on. We've been talking back and forth over the last few months, and I'm excited to get to listen to you all teach today. So why don't we dive a little bit deeper into your personal histories and tell us a little bit about yourselves. And let's start with you.
All righty. Well, I come from a professional dance background, teaching, and decided to develop something that I saw there was a need when I went to teach a group stretch class and saw this massive inability for people to move, even young kids. And I thought there seems to be a need for more flexibility training and understanding amongst all kinds of folks. And for me, it just seemed like it was a niche in fitness that was, so I decided to develop it a little bit, was going to Arizona State University, got hired as a grad assistant in strength and conditioning up with the athletics, developed more of the program, went to school, did my study and my research work on the science of flexibility actually in the late 90s. So it's been going on for many, many years for me.
That is great. And we are going to elaborate on all of this later. So everyone who's listening, you are in for a treat. And Chris, tell us a little bit more about you.
Thank you, Prentice. I've been a physical therapist since 1989 with a focus on orthopedics and sports medicine. And of course, being a manual therapist, I was very much of a hands-on manual sort of practitioner and relying on my assessment skills and my therapy skills mostly through my hands. I was a former professional ballet dancer back in the day. I also have a extensive background in different forms of martial arts and also the internal martial arts of Qigong and Tai Chi. And I brought all that with me when I met Ann in 1998, started working with her in 1999 at the Stretch Twin Clinic, and brought my integration of physical therapy with fascial stretch therapy. She, of course, taught me. I got free tuition. We hit it off. I won't get too much into the dating phase, which led to the marriage phase, but it was a wonderful courtship, shall we say, and then a partnership.
Yeah.
And then we put our creative brains together, and it's very different than it was back then. We've just always tried to make things bigger, better, clearer for everyone involved.
That is great, and that is one reason, actually for both of you, why we get along so well, and I think we're going to have a great collaborative relationship, is that we're all martial artists. And we both dance, although I never danced professionally. I could be seen around the tango halls of Chicago, but that is my extent with dance. And if anyone has the opportunity to do that, I would recommend that becomes part of their fitness regimen. But let's transition now into CES. And of course, CES philosophy is pretty simple, and that's finding a movement impairment and identifying a client's movement strategies, how they get through life, applying a program using our 4-step process of inhibition, lengthen, activate, integrate, and teaching them how to live their lives again. Now, Chris, can you talk about your experience in contributing to this project?
Yeah, first I want to say I want to thank you and everyone else who's been a part of the team in inviting me to be a part of this wonderful collaborative effort at making the CES, the Corrective Exercise Specialist program, the manual, the book, just I guess you call it the next generation or version of it. And so I really enjoyed rewriting, and of course, I'm just building on what was there before. People who wrote the first book really put in some great fundamentals. Of course, NASM has always been on our radar screen. And so writing chapter 2, it's human movement science and corrective exercise. I got to put in new research in there and update the entire chapter and write some of my own work in that and integrate it. Basically, the human movement system has always been on top with discussing it as a global system. You have to be aware of the muscular system, the skeletal system, the neurological system. And then we updated it with the regional interdependence model, which physical therapists came up with when they realized traditional biomechanical model is just not delivering the outcomes we want. It's not helping everyone. It's not doing what we think it should do. And so when we finally discovered, yes, when a pronated foot can involve action at the knee and the hip and even the back and create problems above, create problems below, it's like, how can we study this now and come up with better ways to, for physical therapists was to diagnose, assess, and treat. And for trainers, it's obvious to assess and correct the movement patterns that are dysfunctional. And so I helped update that chapter, bring all that in and with new research, basically.
Okay, so the regional interdependence model hasn't been in the trainer space for a super long time, but how do you respond to the new trainer or even the old curmudgeons? I put myself in that group, although I practice corrective exercise with my clients, but the idea that this isn't important, this isn't necessarily important, and the concept that it's strength that fixes all problems without taking into consideration efficient movement strategies.
Yeah, I think you know, when we used to look at, and you're correcting a squat, for instance, just to, let's say, a full body squat, not even with a bar anywhere being utilized, and you see the hip shift, some very basic things. We thought, okay, that's a movement correction, and we're looking at that. And we didn't back then really take into things like that pronated foot or the theme or other things. Now the trainer of today is so much more advanced in being able to assess and has been at the forefront of training the trainer to do corrective movement. Now is at an epitome of level. I mean, it's, you know, physical therapists who have to discharge a patient because their insurance doesn't, looking for trainers to refer that have extra knowledge of not just training, but can you do corrective exercise? And so I think this is perfect timing, bringing in this brand new, you know, program and having trainers up their game and actually increasing the referral possibilities with health professionals and others who can't seeing that patient.
Okay, that is great. And yes, there has been an evolution, and trainers are, I think they're as smart, but I think they're more comprehensive in including corrective exercise, and they're willing to step out of their comfort zone and try additional modalities, bringing it back to helping their clients reach their goals and be more efficient. But let's move on to you, Ann, and can you tell us a little bit more about the history of fascial stretch therapy? I know you said there were people who weren't moving around too well.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting evolution, Prentice, because I started as a dance teacher, so the group fitness made sense to me. But I realized when I got hired at Arizona State that it would be working more one-on-one with the athletes. So I needed to shift my gear and work in more of a therapeutic way with the athletes. And so kind of ironically, I went dance studio to the strength conditioning room, which is a very different atmosphere. And I realized when I looked at these big guys, I'm not quite 5'2". When I looked at these big guys, I thought, I'm going to have to figure out how I can get some sort of advantage biomechanically with these guys to try to move them through space. So the first thing I did was I got them off the mat and I got them onto a weight bench. And then I took one of those big, thick weight benches and I tied their leg down to the bench press with their leg hanging off the back. And I thought, aha, bondage and leverage. Now I have a mechanical advantage and I get myself underneath and open those joints, which is where so much of the restriction is in humans, and move them through space so that they are not having to stabilize themselves. So it came out of necessity. It came out of figuring out biomechanically what I could do to make it as efficient as I could and not kill myself with guys 3 times my size. And then the other paradigm I wanted to shift was to make it not painful. And my whole thing is everything is only as good as it transfers to activity. And because I would have the athletes get off, eventually it was a treatment table, and go out and do what they needed to do, I got instant feedback with what was working and what wasn't working. So it was a fabulous, very small loop to see what was working. And for me, it was like having the opportunity of having 26 different kinds of athletes to practice and refine the technique on.
Very good. And this question is for both of you. I know, Chris, earlier you mentioned the pronated foot and how through regional interdependence that could influence biomechanics up the kinetic chain. And you just mentioned the hip. When you initiated this practice, were there any common compensations, restrictions that you felt like you were dealing with more than another one?
What's amazing to me is the amount of commonality, no matter what the sport was. And I'll speak from a sport background because that's the premise of my experience, where Chris has got more of an spectrum of medical, where mine was more performance-based. The amount of locomotion that was restricted by those hips being tied up. So what I found almost across the board was the glute medius on the left side, the stabilizing side needed more attention, and the iliopsoas complex on the right because it's locomotor. So that pattern was something that I saw over and over and over, depending, it was male, female, and it didn't matter with the sport. So I think that was kind of the premise of where I started with unlocking the hips. We lovingly call in the NFL unlocking the power of the booty, trying to get that to open up so that everything down the chain or the net would open up. So the hamstrings were secondary to getting those hips to open up.
Okay, and you just mentioned an asymmetry there. Now,
Yes.
was that dependent upon hand dominance, foot dominance? What did you know?
It had nothing to do with that, and I found that fascinating.
Okay.
Because they could have a difference in the
Hand dominance.
in the hand dominance, but no matter what, that was the pattern that I'd see in the legs. It's kind of interesting.
Okay. Okay, and Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
It supports sort of what most trainers know about tight hip flexors need to be inhibited to help activate, let's say, the glutes. Just make it real simple. We can always make it more complicated. We'll make it simple. And so I always found that, Ann would have to sometimes send me in to do some deep tissue release, for instance, where I would have to get my not so sharp elbow into that iliopsoas area.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where trainers realize if they're not also trained or licensed as a massage therapist, they may have to refer out. But however, there's a ton of inhibition techniques that's part of the NASM model.
It looks like we just lost Chris and Ann momentarily.
Okay.
This is just one of the functions of having to work over a lot of networks, and it looks like they're back. Can you guys hear me?
Back?
Yes,
Yeah.
you're back.
Okay, sorry. So I was just talking about the old, I don't know where you lost me, but I was talking about the familiarity of hip and hip. Are we still there?
Yes, you were explaining,
Okay.
you were elaborating on the elbow of death.
Right, and so trainers are using inhibition techniques. Really, that's what they're doing. If they cannot put their hands on the tissue, there's a lot you can do with inhibition. And the other thing is, we're talking about here lengthen. We're focusing on the lengthening aspect of the paradigm of working with a training client. However, stretching can also be part of the inhibition phase. It's kind of an overlap, right? You do the self-myofascial release, let's say, of the iliopsoas to activate the glutes, but you first have to inhibit. Then next would be, let's say, the lengthening of the same tissues, the iliopsoas, followed by the activation. So it's just that's what the athletes, the football players that we work with always did that. It was a pattern that we're familiar with, and they may have needed in that asymmetrical kind of fashion, Prentice, that Ann was talking about, in which case if you have that tighter hip flexor on one side, they may need a longer time period, longer durations of self-myofascial release, longer durations of the stretch. So that's where now you're getting a little more sophisticated, more individualized with your session with the client by getting a feel for what do they need. You can't just get in, get out. You got to spend a little bit longer period on time where they need it, but you don't have to do it where they do not need it. And that's where the expertise comes, the experience, the mentorship, the constant education like we're doing now.
Perfect. And that's a perfect segue, actually. So let's talk a little bit about, a lot more about the science of flexibility. And I know we have two definitions of fascia there, but you said something really interesting, and I promised myself I was going to stay on track, but here we are. You did mention the two phases of inhibition and lengthening. So can you explain what those mechanisms are, what those mechanisms of overlap are in the muscle?
Okay, well, this ties in, like you said, it's a good segue into the definition 1 and 2. I'll get into that just real quick. When we say we do fascial stretch, that's our method, that's our technique that we came up. It's very different than traditional stretching. And just real briefly, we call it fascial stretch therapy, but honestly, in our book, in that book by the same title, the longer term, what we're actually doing is called neuromyofascial therapy. That's what we're doing. But I found that's a long term for our students to use to be certified as, if you understand fascia is already embedded with neurological receptors, sensory mechanoreceptors, that's the neural part. And since it wraps around and penetrates, it doesn't just wrap around. That's old school thinking of fascia. It's not saran wrap. It doesn't act like saran wrap. It's not just structure. It's software and hardware. It penetrates the muscle all the way down to the cell. So those who understand fascia and fascia therapy understand really what they're doing when they understand the true fascial anatomy is neuromyofascial. It's all together. We call it fascial stretch therapy with the understanding, if you know what fascia is, you know it's neuro and you know it's myo or muscle. So getting into the definition. So there's an organization, believe it or not, their whole job is to, their responsibility is to determine proper nomenclature or names of anatomical terms. So it was put up before them by a special put together board from the Fascial Research Society, of which we are founding members, to decide, okay, once and for all, this is becoming a garbage can term. People are just saying fascia this and fascia that, and we're getting controversies and arguments, and fascia stretches. No, it doesn't, because we're not talking about the same thing. So definition number 1 is, decide what you're talking about. Are you using definition 1 of fascia or definition 2? So the new definition is, definition 1 is fascia. Let's talk about fascia as a singular tissue. There's many kinds of connective tissues. Some are loose connective tissues, some are dense connective tissues. So it's really for the purpose of doing research and academic study into this tissue. Does it stretch, for instance, or does it not stretch? How does it work with hydration and so on and so forth? So when you speak about a fascia, you're talking about a piece of tissue, very specific, because fascia is a generic term for connective tissue. What kind of connective tissue are we talking about? That's a fascia, a piece of fascia we're studying, and we have results and outcomes in research. The next definition is the fascial system. Now, because of what I just said, the fascia is involving the entire body and all systems of the body, the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the musculoskeletal system, and on and on and on. We're talking about the system. Obviously, when you do studies on that, that's a lot more complex. We know much, 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 much less because of the variabilities. There's so many variables involved, right? Fascia as a tissue, that's easy, much easier to study. Does this piece of dense connective tissue, does the intertibia band stretch or not? Let's test it.
No.
Okay, now we know under different conditions. You talk about the entire system. Does the neuromyofascia of the lower of the leg, of the thigh, of the calf, does that does it stretch or not stretch? That gets more complicated. You have to encounter the lymph system, the circulation system. All these things have an impact on the flexibility of the muscle of that area of the limb. So I think we all have to all of us have to be educated on using these two terms that have been established now after much heartache and meetings. Are you talking about fascia? And what type of fascia are you talking about? So we're all on the same page, and what research. And then the system, which allows more explanations and definitions and it involves all kinds of professions and all kinds of scientists, because it's about different systems because the fascial system touches every other system in the body. Yeah.
Okay, that is an excellent definitions. And for those of you who are listening, we're going to now talk about how does this tie into training? How does it tie into training? How is this science of stretching? How is the science of stretching related to functional training?
So I have come up with, I wrote about this in some articles. Boy, I've had a busy summer last summer, all of half of last year into this year, the first quarter. I've been so busy writing for about 8 different books and articles and so on about different aspects of fascia and stretching. And I have come up with a term to help teach my students and to describe things, and it's based on science. I call fascia a stretch activated system. Why?
Okay.
Because the normal state of fascia in a living person, if you're just standing there, it's under a certain amount of normal tension, or if you want to call it stiffness. But don't think of stiff as a bad thing. You have to have stability and support in your body through the fascial system, because that is the fabric of your body, not your skeleton. That would fall apart if it didn't have the support of the fascia. The muscles would be hamburger if it didn't have fascia to contain it. So fascia is really the most important thing with the structure, but it's also function. And so, when we talk about it, it's all embedded. Sorry, Anne keeps pulling me back, so I'm a little distracted here.
Very exciting for us, Prentice.
So when we talk about training, it's thinking about the body a little differently. There is a normal amount of tension that we need. And when you assess the person, is the tension excessive, in which case they need more inhibition, perhaps more stretching to lengthen, or is it deficient, where they have a lack of stability, not just in a muscle. We're talking about lack of spur joint. It's a lack of stability globally. I mean, there are people with things like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, where they have connective tissue disorders that they are so loose, everything's too loose. So they need stability in the entire system. They have the lack of normal tension. So I think when you think of fascia as a stretch activated system, it is activated, it is already under tension in a gravitational field on Earth, and it needs to stand up against gravity. And so therefore you have tension, not just strength. And then the tension can get imbalances. Start thinking of it that way. That's why you're inhibiting things and rolling on things with self-myofascial release. So it's like, yeah, it's the same anatomy on one level, but on another level, how can we think of it in an updated fashion? And this all comes from science. Tensegrity, if you look that up, T-E-N-S-G-R-E-T-T-Y, tensegrity, tension integrity, so it's a word, has been around a long time. And the science of it briefly, Donald Ingber, medical doctor, PhD from MIT, he's a mechanical biologist and has done a ton of studies and research showing and proving that it's all the cells react to the same thing at once through mechanodeformation, meaning a stretch or anything that is imposed on the body. The entire body senses it and reacts to it. With gene transcription all the way down to the cell, things start to change. So it's not just that you just lengthen the muscle, the blood is changing and everything inside the body is actually reacting to what you just did in training of any kind and in stretching in particular. So it's like, yeah, we can have huge effects where people don't just have increased range of motion, they have a feeling of well-being. Where did that come from? That's not just, the feeling of well-being comes from the interoceptors. That's a whole nother neurological receptor in the fascia of your organs and other places where your blood pressure goes down, because when you're stretching, it's releasing things. And when you're stretching for recovery, the blood pressure goes down. When you're stretching for activation, dynamic stretching, pre-game, pre-training, your blood pressure is starting to go up in a normal way as it should, but it's responding because you're doing these dynamic stretches, quicker tempos that are upregulating things, and the entire body is responding to it, not just the muscle. So I think people start to realize, okay, let's think of it as a whole body system. It's stretch activated. They may be too tight because the tension's too much. Let's stretch it, inhibit it, bring it down, regulate, whatever you want to call it, or do the opposite when they're too flexible, too loose.
Okay, that is excellent information. Now, on the next bullet, we have some old definitions of flexibility, and sometimes we use flexibility, mobility, and mobility interchangeably in flexibility training and the practice of stretching interchangeably. Can you talk about that a little bit? And then I have a follow-up question for you.
Sure. If you look at sort of the classic definitions of flexibility, they simply say this, and these are PhDs who wrote, I'm not going to call out who said these things. They're established authorities actually in training, not NASM. It goes back to the researchers that call it range of motion. They just call flexibility range of motion. Yeah, that's a part of it. If you look at other definitions in English, not just what a PhD in exercise science would say, they say it's range of motion only. If you look at someone who knows the definitions of words, another word is adaptability. I like that a lot better. It involves lots of things to get flexible. A lot of us know this. If you strengthen, it makes you more flexible. You don't have to stretch sometimes to get more flexible. You don't feel stiff. You're training. Everybody has had that experience. It's adaptability to the loads imposed on the body. So depending on that specific type of training, you have different target goals. It's all flexibility. So stretching is one means. You can strengthen to get flexible, but stretching is another mean for specific indications that you're too tense. You need to downregulate, inhibit. So that's a specific reason to stretch. Mobilization, I like to do the finger thing. If I just move my finger like this, I don't feel any resistance in the tissue. I'm mobilizing it. This is mobility of my finger. I'm demonstrating mobility. If I didn't have mobility, it'd be limited, but I have good mobility. Why does it stop? I'm encountering a barrier. So here's a trainer. I'm going to stretch you, Mr. Smith. Okay, you may do so. So we go back a little bit. There's resistance. I call that the beginning of stretching. It's not always to lengthen. You're hitting a barrier. You're lengthening a barrier, but it could be for 1 to 2 seconds, like active isolated stretching, or it could be longer durations where you do more static stretching and everything in between. It's a whole spectrum. So we need to get a little more sophisticated in our thinking. Stretching is not just one way and one thing. It's a spectrum. There's different reasons to stretch in different ways, and you're going to vary the parameters of intensity, duration, and frequency to do so for the different sport, the different person, the different imbalance. So basically stretching is lengthening, but actually it's also when someone stretches in a very light fashion, it helps activate the system. That's something we don't think about. Because lots of times, Prentice, our athletes will come in and they want a 20-minute fast tempo dynamic stretch before the game.
Prevent.
And we're like, we're not going to, in my mind, I'm like, I'm not stretching you. I don't want to weaken your system. I don't want to inhibit the entire system right before you go play. But when I bring you through the movements, it's a dynamic stretch is what everyone's used to doing on themselves. You can do that on a client, and we teach that, where you dynamically move through the positions, but it's not just mobilizing. You're not just doing mobility. It's mobility with a little bit of stretch because you're challenging the tension in the system. And if you hit something that needs inhibition before you go play, it's like, man, this hip flexor is tight. I didn't realize. Then, right, we need to inhibit that a little bit, down regulate that specific area. And that's how you get a little bit more just individualized and specific with what we're talking about with stretching and how you apply it. Throw out those old terms. Flexibility is not just range of motion.
And we had this, actually, I have 2 more questions now. Thank you for that, Chris. We had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about down regulation, thinking about an athlete who is about to do something high intensity. And we talked about flexibility training as per our continuum, getting the athlete to access their range of motion. Some people, there's a thought sometimes that one can't stretch because, or go through the continuum of stretching because it makes them weak before their athletic event. And so can you explain a little deeper that process of going through inhibition, lengthening, and then moving the athlete through the continuum of active stretching, then to excite that nervous system so that they are prepared for their event?
Sure. There's old studies that showed static stretching right before you do a movement that requires power, like a vertical jump, is diminished or even leads to injury. Yeah, sure. If I stretch something that's involved in my power move, like a vertical jump, and I'm stretching and I'm holding it
static
for 30 seconds or more, you're inhibiting, sending the signal, you're down regulating, you're inhibiting the air. We all know that. Why would you do that before something when you immediately need to activate it? You put it at a disadvantage. So, however, after and you're done with training and sports, there's a time to change the time duration. So what it is now is you would do a dynamic stretch. Studies have shown dynamic stretching, dynamic movements, if you will, before activity actually improves the activity. There may be some studies that show, well, this doesn't work either, but as you know, there's all kinds of studies. It's what are we studying? What are we looking at? But there are a lot of positive studies that show, yes, it does improve performance. So that's why they're doing it all over the place. They didn't used to do it. The static stretching, which is long durations and maybe more intensity, would be for inhibition, so that, you know, if something athletes know this, something just starts to get tight, like within 30 minutes, you're cooling down. You're like, oh boy, I overtrained. I overdid something. I pulled something. Let me knock it down a little bit. I need to inhibit this. Otherwise, it may even start to cramp, or I know I'm not going to feel good tomorrow. They just know. So when you inhibit it appropriately and you spend the time, longer duration, maybe more closer to static or slow movements, then you can recover better. And so that's just the proper application.
Okay, thank you. And now, since you're a dancer, can you talk a little bit about the difference between a couple of types of flexibility? Maybe one athlete can do a split. I put myself in that group. I can do a split, but when I practice dance with my daughter, I try to do like the attitude. I'm going to throw out ballet terms. You can correct me if I do use them incorrectly, but when I try to do a movement like attitude, or I try to do a high move like an active movement, like developes.
Okay.
Yeah, developes, or if I try to do something really active like a battement.
Oh, now you're talking. Okay.
Now I'm talking, right? But
so there's different kinds of you can have the ability to move it through space. You can move it through space slowly or quickly with more of a momentum. So there's a spectrum to how much flexibility you have in the neuromuscular control on top of it. Sure. So the whole thing about flexibility is it needs to be customized to what the person needs. And you need to also have the control and the strength to move it through space safely so that you're not going to get injured. So tapping on the difference of my thing is exactly why do you need to do it? Oftentimes splits and tequila go together, I found, in bar settings. That may not be your experience. I'm just saying that that's my research has shown. And you develop, so for example, with the dancers, because I've worked with many, many dancers since that was my background, they need to develop tendon strengthening. So you take them to an extreme position and have them focus on developing the strength at the tendon end, the proximal end, and then having them hold it against gravity in space. So there's different kinds of training that can be done specifically for like the rhythmic stretching that is more for the extreme mobility that's required in some activities.
So a good example is splits. You can do the splits passively. That's called, there's a difference between active
And passive.
So if you just do a split on the ground, that's a passive, more or less a passive. You just stay in there and you're stretching statically.
Yep.
And let's say you can do that. Now, when you get up and you're all warmed up, you did a dance class, and now you're ready at the end to do jumps with splits in the air. And you're like, I can't get off the ground. Not you, Prentice. I know you got some springs maybe.
Some grand jetés in you.
But maybe not. But if you can't do the splits, you may be able to get off the ground. But if you can't whack your legs into a split, you ain't going to be getting into a dance company. That's for sure. Number one, and number two, it's because you're not using. You don't have the either. You don't have the strength, or you're not properly activating things to get the legs fully out at a quick, rapid, intense, strong movement and bring it down with control again. That's a whole nother thing than just sitting in a split. So just because a person can do the split and they have passive flexibility does not mean they have active flexibility, which requires strength in function.
Yeah, that is good. I did bring that up because when we do practice together, and I have a background in martial arts as well, and have done some kickboxing, and I can still hold those static kick positions specific to martial arts, but not to dance. It's a little different. So like what you brought up, that it's specific to the athlete's goals, and you have to take them through that continuum and explore all different types of stretch and strengthening to achieve those different movement strategies. So thank you for that. And let's move on to your study, your 2017 study, Anne. Can you talk a little bit about this and tell us what your findings were?
One of the things that excites me is bringing research into it, because when you develop a technique and we know it works, that is a lovely thing, but research is what gives it validity. So I did my original research at ASU in '97, and then was able to go back and with the University of Arizona Med School do another one through a young man who's going to graduate from med school hopefully next month. Chris came up, non-specific low back pain is probably a multi-billion-dollar challenge in this country. So it was a nice, easy, relatable thing to go after. What I found fascinating about this was in 30 minutes, we had a remarkable, scientifically significant decrease in pain and also increase in function with as little as a 30-minute segment of the FST. And for me, that validity basically matched what I did in '99 or '97 with the studies. So we're looking forward to doing more of that, just because I think it's really important to get those research studies with humans out to validate the power of gentle and specific modalities.
All right, perfect. So now that we've talked about the science of stretching and your study bringing science into why we should be doing the things that we do, let's talk about, and I want to be mindful of the time, let's talk about the synergy of NASM and the corrective exercise process and Stretch to Win.
One of the things I was sharing a little bit ahead of time was going through, and some of us that have a little extra time on our hands at the moment being at home, came across a folder with Mike Clark, who was the originator of NASM 16 years ago, about trying to collaborate our philosophies together. And I'm really excited for the opportunity to finally have that present itself, because there's a beautiful match of philosophy together. So, Chris?
Well, right now the core four, I'll just come out with saying the core four on the floor is something that we like to talk about as a perfect example of a routine one can use. The synergy would work with the corrective exercise specialist, where you can use the core four. This is just one example. There's many examples, and NASM has lots of examples, but I'll use our example right here. It's a practical way to look at a person. You can assess them by using the core four as a movement assessment. and it's working with the 4 key muscle groups within 4 key kinetic chains that have an influence on major stability and mobility. And so you assess the person, right side, left side, and right away you know, oh, they need a 2-to-1 ratio of mobility, flexibility, stretching on this side. It's significantly different than the other side. You can tell right off the bat. And even before you even do the core 4, have them do an overhead squat or a split squat, whatever it is in their routine. You know they're having issues with this training movement pattern. You've done it before. It's like, let's look at you again now, with or without weight. Okay, I can see the imbalance. Let's do the core 4 and see if there's a correlation with one of these 4 key myofascial groups, or maybe all of it within the core 4. Take it through the movement pattern. You can use that as an assessment. Now stretch. Let's do the correction on the core 4 using that sequence. Now get up and do your overhead squat and do your, or whatever it is. Oftentimes what we see, Prentice, is an immediate correction. They can get through it and it released something that was inhibited. It improved movement. They're more efficient, and so on and so forth. And the client feels better. I don't feel that soreness, that pain, that glitch, that restriction. And so we're happy to bring this in to all of you. And I'm going to give it to you guys. Actually, listeners, whoever's listening, we'll tell you a little bit later. I'd like to pass it as a gift. I want to see how it works for you on your own. I suggest doing it to yourself and then trying it on clients. And now with COVID-19 out there, do it online. Bring it into your online programs one-on-one with your client or with a group. You can use this in group stretching or group mobility. Throw it into your current routine, whatever you're using. It's a smaller segment that you can put in within other segments. So have fun, feel free to use it, and give me feedback. I'd love to know how it's working for you.
That's outstanding. And that brings us to our last slide. So what's the best way? I know you mentioned using the core 4 on the floor as an assessment and to confirm what one may see when they're doing the overhead squat, but what's the best way to implement this into, let's say I have squat day coming up in my garage. How am I going to implement the corrective exercise process in the core 4 on the floor to have my best performance this week?
I think the corrective exercise program in and of itself does it. The core 4 is an extra that can, that can sort of zero in on some other aspects of it to make it a totality. And then it's interesting you say that, because you'll see when you do the core 4 on the floor, it's a 75% focus on the lower body, but we bring in the upper body too. But it reveals to the trainer, oh my goodness, when they just did mostly the lower body part of it, it improved their overhead, their upper body movement. That's where you just see the regional interdependence model at work, because you see the connection is the problem was distal. It wasn't in the thoracic spine, because you kind of rolled on that. You tried to correct that, but it's not working. What happened here? Maybe you got caught up in thinking local then, the old school biomechanical. It's like, yeah, you got to look at that. But actually, did you miss something in the lower body? So core 4 cleans it up, and you start seeing connections between, the lower body mobility exercise stretching help the upper body movement in an overhead squat or other things. So that's why what excites me. It's like, this is what we're talking about. This is fascial anatomy in action, or fascial kinesiology.
And I think the other thing too, Prentice, is everybody's looking for efficiency. How quickly can you get something addressed and get on to the other things you want to do? So looking at things more globally and not looking at things from an isolated perspective usually is a much quicker way to get a solution from a movement. And oftentimes, as Chris said, something going on in the upper body, I found with my experience almost without fail is coming from the lower body. And there may be stuff with the edges of the lats that are really inhibiting the scaps moving, or things like that, that where the problem is very rarely, and I know you know this, is where the symptom is. And we tend to fall into the trap of trying to take care of what's screaming the loudest, not what actually is causing the issue.
Here's one more thing, if I may.
Sure.
When you have that client, this has happened to all of you out there, I don't want to train today. I don't want to do it. Okay, do the core 4 and take your time. Make it restorative, make it corrective. And now all of a sudden, their attitude has changed. Honestly, you want to turn a cranky client into a happy client, then they don't want to train today.
Yeah.
Get them down on the core 4, spend time doing an analysis, a good assessment, really get it to start correcting and having them feel the difference, and do some simple body weight squats and other things just to see how it improves, and they get that feedback. They will be so motivated the next time. They're going to be, I'm ready to train, because I feel like we fixed some imbalances here, and I didn't even want to train, and we kind of did, and I feel the better for it. Try it.
Okay, great. Now, real quick, before we wrap up and get into some questions, I believe our students have an understanding of static stretching, active isolated, and dynamic. Can you explain the concepts of rhythmic stretching and the idea of the stretch wave?
Yeah, I think, I don't know how many people are actually doing that in Rhythmic. What is your background with, so I can talk maybe to what you're familiar with that. Are you familiar with the Rhythmic, Prentice?
Probably by another name, but let's pretend that I'm a beginner.
Yeah, I think it actually, some of it has been derived from the old PNF movement patterns.
Okay, then
you know
yes,
what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, and they started doing it as a mobility kind of thing with it's almost like when you do what they call the flossing, the nerve flossing, you start doing, it's actually kind of a rhythmic mobility stretch too, because you're going into internal rotation, external rotation, bending the elbow, straightening the elbow, looking away. And so it becomes a rhythmic tempo thing, right and left and right and left and back and forth. So that's the rhythmic aspect of it. There's rhythmic gymnastics too. That's another aspect, but I don't want to get too far off the spectrum. The stretch wave is something I came up with that term to describe Ann's technique, because it follows, in my sense, the principles of polarity, which is the Taoist symbol of the black and white in a circle, but it's really defines polarity up and down, side to side in movement, the agonist antagonist. Opposite directions are complementary. They're really not opposite, because to do movement, it's a combination of both. So with the stretch wave, we stretch with traction and oscillation and circumduction in circular patterns that involve a wave-like movement. And we have found, instead of being cardinal planes, moving like a robot, stretching like a robot, we know training has changed, right? Training used to be very robotic, very straight, very linear. And now it's circular. And so stretch wave, for me, encapsulate that whole aspects of everything's a wave in the body. You know, the EKG is your heart wave. The light waves hit your eye with waves. Everything is a sine wave in nature. It echoes physics and nature and biology. So I put that into this term, and it's simple for athletes and other people just understand, oh, okay, I like moving this way. It's more rhythmic. It feels more comfortable than just going into a stretch either hard to feel the pain or just very linear.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying those terms. And thank you very much for presenting today, being on this webinar. I felt it was very informative. And I think those of us out there listening, you've got a lot of really good information. So I hope that you take this and apply it. And we have Andrew back on. We're going to answer a few questions before we log off for today.
We sure are. Now, first thing I want to go ahead and do here is get up our next slide, because we've got some special stuff here to kind of give away today first before we do everything. Chris and Ann were awesome enough to provide us with a few links here. Now, can't click on these links here directly. However, if you want, go ahead and screenshot the page right now. The first one is going to be the Core 4 on the floor. So go ahead, head on over to stretchtowin.com/register. And that way you'll be able to get the mobility stretch program video download. I know we had some people asking in the comments here today, you know, how they could get those videos. Well, that's where you go. Secondly, we've got both of their books on some specials going on here this month. Offers are good until April 30th. First, the Stretch to Win book, second edition ebook version. They're going to be giving you 50% off that. So if you go over to us.humankinetics.com just do a search for Stretch to Win PDF right there on the website, and it'll bring their book right up, and use that code ATHOME50 at checkout. Then for the Fascial Stretch Therapy book, head on over to handspringpublishing.com. Same thing, you can either write down that URL right there, take it out of the video, or go ahead and just search Fascial Stretch Therapy there at handspringpublishing.com. Use the code NASM15 and get 15% off at checkout. Good thing though too is once we get this webinar here posted up to YouTube today, all of these links are going to be in the info section right below the video. So you'll be able to check things out there at NASM's YouTube page and link out directly from there to go ahead and check out Chris and Ann's stuff. We then also have our own NASM giveaway and some special stuff. So as I mentioned before, we've got a 35% sale going on here in tune with the webinar today. Go ahead, give our product advisors a call at 888-773-1827, and they're going to be able to get you 35% off if you just mention that you were a part of webinar 19. So whether you tuned in live or whether you watch later here tonight after, go ahead, give those PAs a call, and they're going to get you hooked up. And before we jump right into the questions live here, also we have a giveaway today. So we're going to be giving away a free online program version of our CES course. It's the one that's out now. And we selected at random here for one of our attendees that was tuning in, and that is going to be Thelma Dillon. So Thelma Dillon, congratulations. You're going to get that free CES. Someone from the product advisor team is going to be reaching out to you via email to get that all set up for you here. So guys, I'm going to jump in here real quick to get my windows back looking all good so I can see you. Perfect. All right, so we got a whole bunch of questions here. Try and get through them quick. We've run up against our hour, but luckily we got the main presentation taken care of, so we'll go ahead and just take whatever time you need. Try for the Cliff Notes version for some of these answers if you can. But you know, we still don't want to let anybody down. So our first question today is coming from Lauren, and she asks, I have a client with a really bad hip mobility condition that I've been working really hard with. I think it's her psoas, and I can't seem to get things moving. Any recommendations for some easy stuff to do for a client with hip mobility problems?
You know, I start thinking as a physical therapist, and it doesn't matter if you're not a physical therapist, I'm just going to tell you what else it could be besides the psoas. You could be right. It could be the joint. A lot of people are born with what we call a cam hip. They may have some acetabular impingement. They may have the head of their femur is not perfectly circular in birth, before birth, during birth. It may have not developed. And so there's different conditions, but we don't know until we get an x-ray. But what you can do is circular movements. Honestly, it looks so simple, as if you had a hula hoop around your hips. I hope you all know what that is, and I'm not too old, and I'm the only person who knows what a hula hoop is. I think they still sell them. Okay, but the point is, put your feet fixed and make sure the hip feels okay. So they oftentimes, by varying where you put their feet, helps their hip above. Then have them do circular movements one way, then the other way. You'll be surprised, clockwise versus counterclockwise, one direction will feel better. Start with the easier direction, then do the other. That's your assessment. And that will start to open up any it will help you assess and then possibly correct some micro restrictions within the hip. Just stay away from pain, of course. And then attempt to stretch the psoas. It'll go a lot better.
Gotcha. Yeah, that actually takes me back to some stuff I did in physical therapy, and they had this the wobble chair, they called it, and it was just kind of an office chair with the screws removed from the bottom, and I would just sit on that and rotate one, rotate the other, front, back, left, right, and man, it did a lot to actually kind of just help open things up. So thanks for that. Moving on to our next question here. This comes from Jeff. Earlier in the presentation, you mentioned something about releasing the gluteus maximus right before activating it. When you're talking about releasing and lengthening muscles, you know, do you want to activate those things together, or because sometimes with the CES continuum, we talk a lot about, you know, opposite sides of the joint, inhibit one, activate the other. Is there benefit to doing that kind of stretching on something you're going to activate?
One of the things is the concept of reciprocal inhibition. If you've got too much, something's hypertonic on one side, it doesn't activate on the other.
Mhm.
So the gluteus medius on one side, and then the iliacus on the other. So oftentimes you've got to look at both sides of the bone to see what's going on and decide if opening one or lengthening one is what it needs, or it doesn't need more of a stabilizing. So everything works in continuum with each other, right? So it can be something happening on the opposite side of the body that needs to get addressed. And I'm always looking at how can you just get everything firing as optimally as you can. And if something won't let go and you keep wailing on it, you need to go somewhere else because it starts to protect itself.
Here's another thing they may be talking about. The question may be, if I can reframe it on some level, okay, why are you stretching something you're going to activate? Like the glutes, why are you stretching it if you want to activate it because it's inhibited? Well, this is the reason. When you do the glute stretch, the way we do it, getting deeper into the joint capsule, it may be that, yes, the outer is inhibited and you're stretching the hip flexor to get to that. But however, in the glute stretch, if you can target the capsule, which is a deeper glute, it's a serology, you see. That's part of the inhibition too, is not just in the front. It's actually, the capsule is tight in the back, even though the muscle's inhibited and weak and excessively long, let's call it the old way of Yanda. He talks about that. So we're trying to open up the capsule deep. That's why we do these circular movements, and you can start opening up the capsule, and now you can fire the glute much better from working posteriorly in the back, not always just the front. You need to release the front, the hip flexor, of course, but we're not initially just trying to stretch. We're not trying to actually stretch that glute as much as getting, if we call it a glute stretch, but honestly, it's the lumbopelvic hip girdle. We're addressing the low back part that's tight. So how you do the movement, which is how we teach you, is where you can specifically target what part of the back fascial net is caught or stuck, and that's more stretch.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. And that actually kind of feeds right into this next question I got right after that, which is kind of asking about, what are some of the differences between dysfunctional mechanics that are due to muscle imbalance versus structural differences. And I think that kind of addresses that, you're getting more into that deep joint mobility as almost an aid to fixing those muscle imbalances that you may have, more focused on with like self-massage and foam rolling techniques to actually inhibit, and using the stretching a bit more functionally. So very cool. So let's go on to our next one here. And this is considered with some clients out there are hypermobile. And I know that's kind of a buzzword these days. We hear it a lot around the office. And this question comes to us from Allison. And she's wondering, will stretching make it worse for somebody who's already got, say maybe it was a client who's just getting through pregnancy, or somebody who maybe had just been doing nothing but, slow flow yoga for all their life, and man, they can just contort and bend themselves into every way possible. Is stretching going to help them still, or is that something they should avoid in those cases?
Yeah, I think, okay. So I'm trying to think of a short answer.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I know, right? Yeah.
You can
we'll
think of.
We'll let the stream keep going here to answer these. So hopefully everyone can tune in, and then even if they can't, just a reminder to everybody, we will post this later on YouTube. So if your question didn't get answered, we'll try to get this up there and tune in later to get it from us.
It's one we hear a lot because it's a very common thing today.
I'll tell you this, and it comes down to CES. It comes down to corrective exercise and become a specialist at it. And I'm not just advertising you guys. I honestly believe that. I'll tell you why. Robert Schleich, PhD, one of the preeminent researchers of fascia, and he does his fascial fitness kind of thing. And he talks about, I like the way he makes it very simplified. This is a simple model. There's the Viking, built for stability. And you guys know what we're talking about, like the 7-foot tall strongman, right? They're built to lift and push. They don't have a lot of mobility and flexibility. They're about stability. Then Robert Schleich says there's that body type, and then there's the dancer, really loosey-goosey flexible, maybe too flexible. But guess what? What is reality? That's the spectrum, the two ends of the spectrum. Who's in between? you will have hybrid. You'll have people that are half Viking and half dancer, and you have one person who's Viking on top and dancer below, lower body, and the other person's reverse. They're a dancer on top, flexible, and they're inflexible on the bottom. So it comes down to corrective exercise assessment, and then do the correction to bring it back into balance. So for these people that are too flexible, they're not necessarily hypermobile all over.
Mhm.
So what you do is you stabilize or strengthen that which is hypermobile, but you better know how to assess what's, what needs to be stretched, because oftentimes it's a downstream, upstream issue, kinetic chain. If you have this thing here and the hip is hypermobile, but their back doesn't move,
Mhm.
the hip will always hurt. But if you get the back to move, actually, let's say the opposite. It's usually the lower back is hypermobile, and then the hip doesn't move. Their back's going to stay in pain because of hypermobility
Mhm.
in the lower part of the back. You open up the hip, now it takes stress and strain off the back. It actually doesn't have to be hypermobile anymore to share the load and the movement, because you opened up the hip. Now the hip can share the movement of whatever you're doing in the squat or whatever,
Mhm.
and now the back feels better.
And Chris, I wanted to briefly piggyback on what you just said. In the new CES, we have a chapter on mobility assessments. So we do have a CES continuum that we should follow, but our mobility assessment is going to give us a little insight into which limbs require more stability, more time spent in activation training to get that local joint stability. And as you were saying, you'll find also which areas need more flexibility, to use the old term, need more flexibility training. But you want to use your assessments to pull out that information to what you should be spending time on with your clients.
Wonderful. So next question, we're going to pivot a little bit here. Try and get a quick answer for this one from you. Does lactic acid buildup affect flexibility? So I think we're looking at things kind of from a recovery standpoint here. This question's coming to us from H. Lynn.
What do you think, Ann, for the boys who just did all that strength
Well, it's
training? This is a good example is when we get the football players, and we used to get them, they were in this hypertrophic phase, right? Getting ready for camp. And boy, they come in sore puppies right after they train.
well, and I think it's not as simple as lactic
DOMs.
acid. Lactic acid. There's the micro tearing of the tissue. There's so many different things that have to be looked at. Their hydration, their stress levels with what's going on. I always am able to add or to juice it down to a single thing like lactic acid, because it's changed their on what the soreness comes from. I would say the largest factor of anything is the hydration piece of people from a lack of flexibility. Or I used to do quickly, when I would be stretching my athletes, they would have an IV. I'd work with a naturopath, and they were being IV'd while I would stretch them. And about 7 minutes into the IV, their mobility would remarkably change, almost to the minute, because of the hydration point in their body. So I would say that piece is probably the largest contributing factor to soreness and lack of flexibility or increasing flexibility.
Sure, yeah. Those products. Oh, go for it, Prentice. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to piggyback on that. I think lactate has been coined the enemy, and I'm not a physiologist. I don't remember a lot of biochemistry, but I have been quarantined, so there's that. Lactate is very important for our energy production, and what people are usually feeling is that increase in hydrogen ion concentration during the exercise that eventually gets buffered.
Yeah.
That eventually gets buffered. So like Ann was saying, there's some amount of micro tearing that takes place in the muscle as a result of training, and there are other irritants that get flooded into the system that give that perception of pain.
Yeah. And the best part is hydration is going to be one of the main things that helps that buildup of waste products from metabolism, such as lactate. help you better flush those out. Is, you know, stay hydrated, and you're going to feel less of that lactic acid
And
burnout.
decrease the inflammation.
And here's the other thing with stretching. You don't want to stretch muscle that has been damaged.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're in a hypertrophy phase, you don't necessarily want to increase the length of micro-torn tissue. So we do more oscillation, more
Flushing, lymphatic flush.
We actually do hydration stretching. We actually we know that stretching changes the permeability of cells. However, if muscle fibers are being damaged, you have to avoid lengthening. But at the same time, there are movements you can do that we teach that you can do to improve the lymph flow and the hydration and everything else to do with healing and recovery. And so that's a different aspect of stretching, not to lengthen. We're actually doing movement to restore permeability. And another note is when they do heal, you can stretch. You get what's called in science, they did research on this. The tissue super hydrates after you stretch. It's super hydrate.
The sponge takes in more.
So if you stretch it at 100%, it actually it increases to 150% of hydration, which actually ironically stiffens the tissue in a good way, in the sense that the hydration is causing the stiffening of the tissue. And you lengthened it. So it's a little harder to understand. You have to get into the science more. I'll just leave that with you, that stretching can increase the hydration and actually even the stability of tissue based on how you stretch, not to inhibit in this case. And that's a sophistication. That's the advanced training of how to use stretching for different reasons.
Sure, fantastic. So moving on to our next one. And this is actually a question that I've seen couple people have asked this through here, and it kind of brings back to more of those like structural differences between people, and you know, asking how does that change the lens of a movement assessment with those type of individuals. And I would go as far to almost pre-answer this and say that it doesn't really. You know, everybody's body has a different structural buildup, but all of us, you know, have a unique movement profile for ourselves, and that's really where the CES continuum comes in, especially the assessment phase. You know, use the overhead squat, use all those various loaded assessments, dynamic assessments if your client's ready for them. You know, get that baseline and compare that baseline to sort of what the CES program shows as almost that Da Vincian, you know, Da Vincian man perfect, you know, I guess, makeup, the kinesiology of it, and just sort of, you know, work slowly toward that. You know, nobody's going to be perfect. And so that kind of, you know, answers that within the product here. I want to go on to the next question though, and this one's right at both of you guys regarding the 2017 study. And they were curious what your metric was for how you scored level of pain with individuals in that.
It was subjective.
Okay.
So analog scale, subjective, interviewed with the medical student, right?
Well, it was pre treatment, post, and then I think the next day.
Then follow up.
So they did it at very strategic increments, and then so it was in a scale of things that they listed, like ADLs with getting out of bed, putting on shoes, those kinds of things.
Function.
Very good. All right, this next one's coming from Russ. Real quick one here. Strengthening glutes will help alleviate lower back pain. Do you agree or disagree?
Quick.
Strength in and of itself, it's a yes and a no.
Yeah.
Right?
It
Screen
depends.
froze a little bit here on my end.
Yeah. Are we still
And
there? Are we good now?
I think we are. We're slowly coming back in. It's buffering all back up here again. So sorry about that, everybody. But yeah, so it's just kind of the notion of as far as, you know,
the resident chiropractor here,
there we go.
I'll say that it depends. If you tell me, if you say that you have low back pain, that opens up an entirely and a pretty large battery of questions as to what is generating that. And I want to furthermore say that it's outside the scope of this course and for the personal trainer to assess, diagnose, and treat pain. There are many differentials that the trainer is not equipped to handle. Maybe there's one that would relate to strengthening the glute, but in that list, there's a whole lot of other things that generate low back pain that the trainer's not equipped to handle.
And when they give the results of their, let's say, their corrective exercise assessment to a referring physician, that it's always great to have a network of people that you can refer your clients to for when it's out of your scope of practice. Yep. You will have a much more successful practice, and you will sound so much more articulate to that referring partner, especially if a physician, chiropractor, whoever. Yep. It's like they have these imbalances, but they still have back pain. I'd like to refer to you and form this partnership because they understand that you know what you know very, very well, and that you know when to refer out.
Fantastic. So to quickly address one here again, that's coming from a lot of people asking about getting CEU for this course here for attending today. You know, these are really just informational only. We give these out for free for everybody to join in. We'll be putting up on YouTube again, like I had said, so you can tune in later if you want to catch anything. The thing about CEUs is, especially for accredited certifications like a CPT, is that they need to come with some form of assessment. There has to be a test involved. So if any of you are looking to, you know, get your credits, need some CEUs, give one of our program advisors a call. They'll be able to talk all the different options that NASM has to offer for that. So tons of options out there for CEUs. You can go to nasm.org to the recertification page there, and that's going to show as well all the various options for CEUs that you can do. But those are things that you do have to seek out, take a course that also has some type of test at the end. Moving to our next question here. This comes from Samantha. What do you guys think about using yoga in a corrective exercise protocol?
I think there's a place for everything. I'm sorry, I'm very specific, so I don't understand when you say just yoga. There's all kinds of yoga.
Sure.
And so that's too generic a term. It's like, which yoga are you talking about? And I'm sorry, I know we're just trying to answer one question at a time. But for me, it opens up a can of worms. It's like, well, we need to talk about certain kinds of yoga. There's isometric based yoga. There's holding static stretches for 3 minutes in some kinds of yoga, and others is the flow yoga. So I don't know which yoga we're referring to here, but there's a role that falls on the spectrum. I would say back to the spectrum from static, not moving, stretching, to ballistic, fast kicking movements. They're all appropriate and safe as long as you know what to do, prepare to do those movements, A, and B, when indicated, where do you put that? Then yoga kind of falls in there. And American yoga's, honestly, yoga as a workout is different than yoga as a spiritual practice. That's another thing. Original yoga is spiritual and it's body, mind, spirit training.
Right.
And there's a lot of the spirit is missing besides getting in a good mood and being nice to each other. They're not really accessing nirvana, that super state of consciousness, right? And so that has a place too, right? That has a place too. So it's a spectrum. It's yoga is appropriate, in the spectrum. So have to apply what kind of yoga
from the assessment.
Goes back to assessment.
Right, exactly. You know, that's the thing with CES, everything comes down to that assessment. And even though we're not discussing the integration phase here today, I would argue that something like a, you know, your sort of more popular hot yoga classes where you're moving through a combination of flexibility and, you know, strengthening work during that class could actually fall within an integration phase of the continuum. You know, after you've done your inhibition, lengthening, isolated strengthening, you know, you could use a 20-minute small yoga exercise with your clients, just using some basic flows, holding those positions for a little bit of time for that activation aspect of them, and almost consider that an integration of, you know, more whole body movements if you don't have access to do it with resistance training specifically. So, all right, let's keep a look through here. A lot of these questions, guys, are very, very, very specific stuff. And actually, I'm finding a number of them are coming through that are a little bit too on the medical side, especially with the ones that are relating to pain. So once again, we are only specifically speaking to the certified personal trainer, corrective exercise specialist audience here, what you can do with clients in all 50 states. So remember that pain management, the moment your clients are saying that they're hurt and they're in pain, refer that out to an actual licensed practitioner, physical therapist, chiropractor, medical doctor, somebody who's licensed to treat those type of things. So moving on here. All right. Yeah, labrum tears. All right, here's one here. This comes to us from Bill, and he asks, how far should we stretch joints in considering how far ligaments can lengthen? What is the elastin component that's kind of okay to lengthen? And I would guess this would come down to something more about like the time and the intensity that you're putting behind that stretch.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I'll do the best I can because if you get into, let's say, the Chinese gymnastic team, they've been stretching their ligaments since they were 2 and 3 years old at the academy. And that's
Deformation.
And they win gold medals, right? I'm not saying we all should do that. And they really push the tissue at very, very young ages when they're still developing. And so they get that kind of excessive range of motion, but they also get a lot of strength. They're training for strength all the time and stability. And so they can maintain it. I don't know what they're like when they retire. I don't think they're doing too well unless they keep that stabilization strength up.
A lot of arthritis usually.
But honestly, getting back to, let's say, the public, the general public, there's a whole, it's been said in the past by many, don't stretch joints. And we disagree. Joint capsule, that's the same neurology as the muscles overlying that joint. So when you have some inhibition or overactivation activation issues of the muscle, it may not be from the muscle. It goes back to the glute question we had before. Why are you stretching the glute when it's inhibited? We're actually targeting the joint capsule over which the ligaments lie, over which lie the muscles. So they're all neighboring tissues. We're trying to get to the tissue, the deepest tissue, the capsule, which is ligamentous in a sense, but it's connective tissue, to open that up. Now the biomechanics of the joint are more correct. They don't have the hip impingement. And now the muscle functions better. So when you talk about ligament stretching, yeah, you don't want to stretch my ligament only.
Never.
I'm not going to stretch my ACL,
right?
My medial collateral ligament of the knee. I will have an unstable knee. That's dangerous, of course. We're not talking about that. We're talking, using the hip as a good example, we're talking about the capsule, really of any joint that's restricted. Get the capsule to open up, the muscle will function better.
Fantastic. All right, and then I've got one last question to ask here before we wrap things up, and this kind of has to do with using the FST protocol with clients, and how this relates to the PNF partner assisted type of stretching that we talk about in CES as well. How does that work on more of a national level? Because I know different states have different regulations for what fitness professionals can and can't do. Certain states have more stringent regulations for licensed massage therapists, using those manual therapy techniques. What would you say to be able to make this usable across the entire spectrum to anybody working out there?
In any state where a trainer is allowed to do assisted stretching of any kind, you can do FST. If I define FST in it's normal fascial therapy, you say stretching. But honestly, what is it in just a very layperson term? Assisted stretching. Yeah. It does much more than that. But if I want to really just put it down into a scope that fits in within your scope, you can call it and define it to someone who's questioning, that looks like you're doing therapy and you're a trainer. If you're a therapist, you're using it as therapy. But if you're using it as a trainer, you're using it for correction, you're using it for inhibition, you're working within your scope. It is assisted stretching. That's all it is. And in other states that say you can't touch a client at all, you can't touch a client. So then you do hands off, instruct them through the core 4 and the other movement patterns, just like you would other training movement patterns.
Gotcha. Makes sense. And then also too, for certain ones, band assisted, I think is, at least gets you partially the way there. It's not quite as, you don't get that full on contract relax aspect of it, but very cool. All right, guys, I want to thank everybody for joining in here today. We continue to have a bunch of questions come in about, the differences between the new CES, the old CES, what are the credits, when's the book coming out, all these things. Please go ahead and call our program advisors at the number below for that. They're going to be able to answer all your questions, let you know all the options that are out there. Just to kind of circle back again here, and pardon me for this crazy dog that's making all this noise in the background, getting a little jealous of the live stream, paying attention to all y'all instead of him. But we're going to have all those links from Chris and Ann. They're going to be up on the YouTube page. So in the video description, we'll be able to link out to everything there. So head on over later this evening, NASM's page right on YouTube. Just search NASM. You'll find it. Go ahead, subscribe. We've got a ton of content going out right now with everybody at home. I know Prentice has been working really hard with our other master instructors to put all kinds of interviews and how to train from home, tutorials, all sorts of stuff like that. So Ann, Chris, Prentice, thank you all so much for joining here today. And it has truly been a pleasure.
Thank
Thank you very much.
All right, take care, everybody. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.